12's Bram Resnick continues our coverage now with what we know about the suspect, Issac King. Bram?
Yeah, Issac King of Avondale has no criminal record. We're learning he was on a trampoline in his backyard an hour before the trooper was killed. DPS Director Frank Milstead said the 20-year-old King has a history of mental health issues but does not have a criminal record. King was on medication for anxiety and depression, according to Milstead. Now, King's mother told investigators she believed her son was in the family's Avondale backyard on a trampoline about 9:30 last night. About 45 minutes later, DPS got a call about a man in the roadway throwing objects at vehicles on Interstate 10 near Avondale Boulevard. Milstead said up to 6 officers tried to control King in a, quote, roadside fight. King allegedly gained control of one of the officers' weapons and fired the shot that killed Trooper Tyler Edenhofer. There are still no answers for why Issac King was standing in the middle of I-10 late last night, throwing rocks at cars. Live in the Alert Center, Bram Resnick, 12 News.